Hello. Please be reminded by the following house rules.
First, turn off your microphone and camera. Second, make sure that you're using the name and email address you used in the registration form. The name you will be using upon sign-in shall be cross-checked with our list of registrants. Third, be respectful. Treat everyone how you would like to be treated. Fourth, be an active participant. You might direct your topic-related questions in the chat box. Your questions will be entertained during the Q&A session.
Fifth, please do not interrupt the speaker during the technical session by raising hand or turning on your microphone. Sixth, no spamming in the chat box. Seventh, you are enjoined to attend the whole duration of the webinar. Attendance forms will be provided by the organizers. And lastly, keep an open mind, learn, and enjoy the webinar.
And reminders, guys, please don't forget to sign in attendance form. Click the link provided for the Google Form attendance, please.
And keep in mind the house rules as we will now start our program.
وقال ربكم ادعوني استجب لكم آمين يا الله يا رب العالمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين Amin.
Etimanem sikuna idayanko untuk mapiasa ini nangno langit tau tanah audang tau nang tertulus ni kau si kunati madang hidayanku mepiaka si kunati
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is thy kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
So, good morning, everyone. I am Genevieve Pongkol.
And I am Princess Claire Punay, and we are fourth-year BSECE students from Mindanao State University, General Santos City, and we are your host for today's event. We hope you filled in the sign-in attendance form because it will be closed in a short while. So, attendance check tayo. Meron tayong participants from, of course, our school, Mindanao State University, General Santos City. So, you can chat or you can comment, guys, on the chat lobby.
So, meron din pala
Paramdam
tayo
naman kayo.
participants from NDMU. Please, or you can chat in the chat box if you are from NDMU.
Gising ba kayo? Nag-almasal ba? Hala, di nagpaparamdam.
Wala.
Hala, AFK yan.
So, okay, guys.
Di ba sila makapag-chat?
Okay, again, from MSU.
Ay,
Chat
press
one.
1.
Press 1 if
Press
you're
1 if you're present. If you're alive and kicking in this morning. Ayan.
Oh,
So, of
marami
course,
na nag-press 1.
given na maraming participants from our school. So, sino pa yung participants natin? Meron tayong participants from NDMU.
From NDMU, press
Press
2.
2. Press 2.
Press 2 from
Or
NDMU.
baka di pagising, baka di pa pumasok.
Oh,
And meron
okay.
din tayong participants
From
from other
Negros.
places. Yes.
From
Meron tayong
Negros.
participants from Negros. Paramdam kayo, guys.
Also, marami na tayo dito, no? So, okay, we welcome you
Okay.
to Web Development Tooling Front to Back. So this program touches the basics on web development and aims to introduce to the participants the ecosystem of web development.
And as the organizers, we are looking forward to lots of positive feedback after the event, and we really hope you will enjoy learning new things or maybe even additional information about web development.
So Claire, let's ask our participants kung may idea ba sila about web development. So we want to know kung ang ilan ba dito ay exposed na sa web development or medyo bago pa ba ito for them.
Yes, you can input your answers on our chat lobby. You can say na I have experience or I'm interested to learn more about this or this is a whole new concept to me. So please interact, guys, so we would know.
Okay, kung bago pa ito sa inyo, press 3.
Oh,
marami.
medyo new yung concept.
Kung may experience or may encounter na kayo about this, press 4.
4, yes. O kapag may introduction na kayo about web development or web design.
Walang. May isa nag-press 4.
So, medyo bago to sa inyo. Parang ganun.
So, mostly, participants natin ay
Yeah, so thank you so much for answering, guys. So, we have our answers. But before we move on to the technical session part, let's watch this short AVP to spark more interest from our participants. Roll VTR.
Website. Maybe you're thinking about having your first one made, or maybe you just need a new, better one. In any case, you should know at least some of the basics about web design. And no worries, it will only take 3 minutes. First of all, let's face it, a website is the core of your online marketing activities. If you look at all the marketing channels and techniques, what they actually do is bring visitors to your website. And the main purpose of a website is turning these visitors into customers. In marketing terms, this is called conversion. A bad website will basically cause you to waste money on other marketing methods because you don't need more visitors if you can't turn them into customers. So the better your website is, the more visitors are converted into your customers. And it doesn't really matter whether you sell consumer products online, provide local services, or build houses. Many people in the industry call themselves web designers, but they really are just a bunch of geeks with some basic coding knowledge. Of course, without much planning, they will pretty quickly create a website for you with lots of information, photos, contacts. But the question is that the way to turn the visitors into your customers? Is that what you need? And the answer is simple: no. What you have to do is look for someone serious about web design. Well, that's where we come in. This is how we make websites, by following the 7-phase web design process. Phase 1. Analysis. The first step is always about information gathering, identifying things like the website purpose, goals, and target audience. Phase 2. Planning. A plan includes a definition of the sitemap, structure, and technologies that we're about to use. Phase 3. Design. Not only do we focus on wireframe models and the visual style in this stage, but also on the usability of the user interface for the best possible user experience. Phase 4. Content. A very important part of the process is choosing the right text, photos, or videos, all optimized not only for your visitors, but also for search engines. Phase 5. Development. Here, we actually create the website using the hypertext markup language and cascading style sheets with some help from databases and other technologies as well. If needed, our websites can be made accessible to mobile devices too. Phase 6. Testing. We test all the technical features like code and scripts, compatibility with major browsers, but we also ask ourselves if the website really fulfills its purpose. Phase 7. Deployment. After we launch the site, our job is definitely not done yet. We always monitor what's happening after the start, enabling us to fix any possible deficiencies. And if you want, we can also manage the future maintenance and updates for you. As you have just seen, web design is a very complex process, but we believe this is how websites should be done, and our customers agree. And if you share our passion for high-quality websites, let's get in touch. We'll be happy to help you with what we do best.
So we hope that the AVP presented made you more interested in the focal point of the discussion for today's seminar. So guys, remind lang ako sa sign-in attendance form, please. Fill up niyo na kasi i-close na namin siya in a short while. So without further ado, let us give the floor to Ms. Esther Grace Palate to introduce our technical speaker.
Our technical speaker is currently a fourth-year BS Electronics Engineering student at Mindanao State University, General Santos City. He was the gold medalist in the National Science Quest 2018 SumoBot competition and in the WorldSkills Philippines 2019 VisMin Zonal Web Technologies competition. He is well-versed in Java and Visual Basic Programming languages, front-end web development, specifically HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, and back-end web development, specifically PHP and SQL. He has experience in Android app development, electronics, and microcontrollers. And today, to introduce us to the world of web development, let's give a warm welcome to our technical speaker, future engineer, Mr. Mark John Larry A. Casero.
Hi guys, good morning. Are you there? So if you can hear me, kindly chat hello world into our chat box. Okay, so let's start our technical session now. So let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen, guys? All right. Okay, so welcome to our webinar. Our title for our webinar is Web Development Tooling Front to Back. I am your technical speaker, Mark John Larry A. Casero. So first of all, why front to back? So web development, guys, is made up of front-end development and back-end development. For front-end development, it's development of things that are facing your users, hence why it's called front-end. So that consists of your websites, your user interfaces, your user experiences, and so on and so forth. Then we also have the back-end development. For back-end, that consists of development of things that are not seen by your users. So for example, how you store your data in your server and how you interact with those data and how you forward those data into your front-end development. So front-end development and back-end development are interlinked and they work together to give your users a great experience in the web. So first, let me show you our session outline. So this technical session will be split into two parts. So first, we will have some concept introductions. So we will discuss some basics of HTML, some basics of CSS, then basics of JavaScript. Then if we have time, we will also discuss the basics of Git version control. So then the next part will be creating a simple web app. So we will create a simple weather app. And then we will deploy this website to a free hosting because there are a lot of free hosting nowadays. And then we'll also discuss some backend concepts if we have time. Okay, so just a little disclaimer, guys. Web development is a pretty complex topic, and I won't be trying to cram all of it into this 2-hour technical session. Instead, I will discuss those things that I am frequently using when I'm developing in the web, and then just those. Okay, so any prerequisites? Okay, there is no really any prerequisites for this webinar. You just need a text editor. So for me, I am using Visual Studio Code. And then I'll be also using a browser. You'll also need a browser. And then this is optional. The last one is GitHub Desktop if you want to follow along in deploying the site. Okay, so let's start. How to become a front-end developer. So before we discuss those core web technologies such as HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript, let's first discuss what you need to know first. So first, you need to understand the internet, how it works, and then how requests and responses are transferred in the internet. You need to understand what is HTTP. And HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It's the protocol that is used by your browsers to communicate to your servers. Although this is not the only thing that HTTP is used for, but that is mainly what it's used for in the field of web development. You also need to understand browsers and how they work, because not all browsers are created equal. There are a lot of types of browsers, right? So we have Google Chrome, we have also Mozilla Firefox, we have Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer, and then we also have Safari from Apple. And these browsers, they're not the same. There are some variations in how they work, and some features in web technologies are not well supported in others than in some. And we also need to understand what is a domain name. So when, for example, we create our website and then we deploy it to a server, and most commonly it is deployed in a cloud, then that server will have an IP address. And when we deploy our websites and if we aim to scale, then usually there will be many IP addresses that are connected to our website, or there will be many servers where our code will be deployed to. And it is hard for humans to keep track of those IP addresses because they are not numbers and they cannot be easily remembered. So a domain name holds the records of those things. So the domain name, for an example of this, is facebook.com. So facebook.com refers to a number of IP addresses where the servers of Facebook are located. And then the DNS is the domain name system, and it's basically the phone book of the internet. So it keeps track of all the records from the different domains in the internet. And then finally, we have hosting. So when we develop our website or web applications, we do it locally. But if we want others to access it, then we need to deploy it somewhere in a server. So the most common today is that we deploy it in the cloud. So that can be in Amazon's AWS or Microsoft's Azure server pages, or it can also be in Google's Google Cloud platform. And there are also other cloud hosting solutions such as DigitalOcean, Linode, and Viture. Okay, so let's proceed to HTML. What is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is used in the front end and gives the structure to the web page, which we can style using CSS, and then we can interact with the web page using JavaScript. So when it comes to the content of your website and then the structure, you will be using a markup language. And today we will be using HTML, and its latest version is HTML5. So anything that you develop, if it eventually goes to the browser, it will eventually compile to HTML. So for data and for content and structure, you will be using HTML. The next core web technology is CSS, or it stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It is the language used to style the front end of any website. So it works together with HTML. So you have your content in your HTML, then you use CSS to style those content, because frankly, HTML doc elements are quite ugly by today's standards if they are not styled with CSS. So you need CSS to deliver a good user interface and user experience to your users. So CSS is a cornerstone technology of the World Wide Web alongside HTML and JavaScript. And next, we have JavaScript. So JavaScript is a scripting language that allows us to add interactivity to our web pages. So common examples that you may have seen on websites is handling how sliders interact with the website, how clicks do to your website, and then pop-ups and so on. Those ads that you see are also powered by JavaScript. So when you see ads, then they are triggered with JavaScript events. So JavaScript back in the day was mainly used in the browser, but with the development of technology, JavaScript can also now be used in backend development. So that means that you only need to learn one language, JavaScript. So when developing for front end and then back end. So for back end, the technology that is used is Node.js. Okay, and lastly, before we jump to coding, we have also Git version control. So Git is a free and open source distributed version control system designed to handle everything from small to very large projects with speed and efficiency. So the basic gist of Git is you can think of it as a supercharged Google Drive for your code. So basically it's Google Drive with steroids because you can upload code in there, and then the more important thing is that you can keep track of all the changes that you make to the code. So when you upload your code in there, you have the option to revert the changes that you have made. If, for example, there are things that you need to change. So GitHub is a provider of internet hosting for software development and version control using Git. So there are other providers out there as well, such as GitLab and Gitbucket. So it offers the distributed version control and source code management functionality of Git, plus its own features. So let's jump to coding. Okay, I have here my text editor, Visual Studio Code, and then a browser. So first, we will tackle HTML. Okay, so you can use other text editors as well. You can even use Notepad, but I would not recommend it because it lacks some features such as syntax highlighting and IntelliSense and code suggestions and those things. So first, HTML. What is an HTML file? So just to give you an overview of our folder structure here, I have the folder webinar, and then we have some folders here for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's go into HTML and then in the tags and attributes. So an HTML file ends in the extension .html. So the most important concepts in HTML are tags and attributes. So if you use VS Code and then you type the exclamation mark and then you press enter, it will generate a boilerplate of HTML. So let us break down all these things one by one. So these things that you see inside angle brackets, they are called HTML tags. And then you also have these things that have values inside them. So these are called HTML attributes. So there are very many types of HTML tags, and we won't go over them all, but I will discuss those tags that are frequently used. So first thing that you will notice here is that we have the first line, doc type HTML. So this is not an HTML tag, but this is actually a part of the code that tells the browsers what version of HTML we are using in this document. So for example, this doc type HTML tells our browsers that we are using the version of HTML5. So the most important tag for HTML is the HTML tag. So this is basically the entry point. Although you can also write your HTML without these tags, just the body or even just one tag, for example, a header tag. But usually and most recommended is that you at least have these tags. So inside the HTML tag, we have two major parts. We have the head tag and then the body tag. Inside the head tag, it contains metadata for your site. So this is not seen inside this web page. For example, we have here a meta tag with an attribute of char set and then UTF-8. So basically, this dictates in the browser what character encoding your website uses. And then we also have some tags as well here, such as viewport and then the width of the device for the content and then the initial scale. So a more important to be noted is the title tag. So this title tag dictates what the title of your web page, what appears in the title bar. For example, let's write hello world in here and then open this in the live server. So we are at base.html. So we can open this directly in our browser. So as you can see, we have hello world in our title. Okay, so I'm using VS Code and I'm using an extension called live server, guys. So just so that we can immediately see the results of what we are typing here. So let's proceed to index.html, where I will introduce the most frequently used tags and attributes. So first, okay. First, let's discuss headings. So header tags are used to provide headings to your site. So for example, we have 6 types of headings: heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, H4, H5, and H6. So as you might notice, heading 1 is the largest. So what you typically write in heading 1 is the most important information of your site. So for a blog website, this is typically the title of a post. So as the number in the heading increases, it's the least important, and its default styling can also be noticed to be getting smaller. So we also have a div tag. So the div tag is basically the most basic form of containers in our HTML. So as you can notice, our tags have opening and then closing tags. So that's very important. So we can nest these tags, we can nest them inside each other, but we just need to remember that the outermost tag should be the first tag that you open should be the last tag that you close as well. So we have a div. So inside it is our text content. So this is hello. And then you can notice here that these 3 spans, although they are in different lines, they are actually in line with each other. So this is a basic concept of their default style. So we have elements that are block level, and then we also have elements that are in line. So for example, these span tags, they are in line. So if you put multiple of them, they will be in line with each other. However, heading tags are block level. So if you have multiple heading tags, then they will immediately go to the next line. So we also have our paragraph tags. Okay. So the P tag stands for paragraph. So you put your paragraphs in the P tag. So, and then we also have the B tag, which stands for bold. And then we have M tag, stands for emphasized text. And the effect of that, you will see that the text will be italicized. There is also the strike tag that adds a striker effect to the HTML, and so on. So basically, in HTML, you typically don't use these tags for their styles, and they're more frequently used so that the browser knows what type of content goes into your website. Because remember, HTML is for content and structure of your website, and CSS is the one that we should use for styles. Okay, so enough for the paragraph part. And just a side note, guys, these tags, you can actually design your site with just H1 tags and then divs, and then you don't use other tags. But these tags, typically they make our life easier. So if we save this, then here we have an A tag. So A stands for anchor, and it is used to link to other parts of our document. So we can link into part of the document itself, or we can link to other documents or other HTML pages. So for example, in this folder, I have page2.html, and I have here an anchor tag with an href of page2.html. The href attribute determines where, or the URL or URL fragment, where the hyperlink or the anchor tag points to. So for example, this anchor tag goes to page2.html. So if I click page2, then it will show me the contents of page 2. So this is page 2. And we also have an anchor tag here with index.html. So if we press this, we will be back to index.html. So that is for the anchor tag. So we also have the target attribute in the anchor tag. So commonly, we use the target attribute with a value of blank, so that when we click an anchor tag, then it goes to a new tab. For example, if we don't want to close this session in the browser. So this is how the target works. So we can also insert images. For example, I have an image of a cat here. And if I want to insert it into my website, then I can use the image tag. And the most important attribute here is the src attribute. So this is the src attribute refers to the URL or the file name of your file of the image that you want to display. For example, if I save this and reload, then you will see that the cat is displayed into the website. So there's a width attribute. So if we decrease this, it decreases the width. But typically you use the CSS again to style these images. So this is just an example if you don't use CSS. And then another thing is that there's an alt tag. So this alt tag is used for accessibility. So your users, some of your users may be blind because blind people also use computers, right? So typically they have screen readers. So they won't be seeing this picture, but their screen readers can pick up the contents of this alt tag. So if you want a good user experience for all of your users, then you would need to have good descriptions of your images in their alt tags so that your users, even if they're blind, can understand what the image is all about. So we can also insert videos. So I have a video file here, and if I save this, we can insert videos. Okay, just like that. So we have attributes here. For example, we have autoplay, which immediately plays the video as soon as the page loads. We also have controls, which shows these controls. So if we remove the controls attribute, for example, then you can see that we no longer have the user interface for controlling the video. Then, like the images, we have the width attribute, and of course, the most important attribute is the src or the source attribute. Okay. So next, we have the iframe. So our iframe tag is used when we want to link to other resources in the internet. So we also have the width attribute and the height attribute, which defines the size of our iframe. And for our src or source, we can put a link to or a URL to some resources. So for example, we can link to another website. For example, this website, example, https example.com is actually another website from another domain. So if we visit it, this is the website. So we can embed that website into our own site using an iframe. Of course, not all websites allow this. So for example, if we change this to google.com, the domain google.com rejects our request because it restricts displaying its sites using an iframe. So there are things that are not allowed. There are some resources that are not allowed. But if you own the resources, then you can very well use the iframe. Then next we have lists. So here we have an ordered list, and then we also have an unordered list. For ordered list, we use the OL tag, and then inside for each item, we use the LI tag or the list item tag. So we have two types of list. We have the ordered list and the unordered list. So the difference between them is that the ordered list by default have numbers in them that determines the order of the items, and then the unordered list only have bullet points. So that's how you insert lists into HTML. Okay, let's go to tables. So we can add tables using the table tag, and for the headers, we use the thead tag. So this thead tag is this part here, the headers of the table, and then for each column, we use the th tag. So this is column 1, column 2, column 3. And then we also have the table body tag, and inside it is each of the rows, which is indicated by the tr tag or the table row tag. And then for each table row, we have the table data or the TV tag, which determines each cell in the table. So back when CSS was not yet mature, people used the tables to lay out their websites. So for example, if they want a header here and then a sidebar and then a footer, then they will use a table for the entire site. But nowadays, since CSS is already matured, then it's not recommended to use tables for laying out your sites. So we use tables for their intended purposes as only, such as displaying data. Okay. Next, we have the block code. Next, we have the block code. So the block code is basically it's an element or a tag that puts its content in an indented manner. So it basically is used to contain codes from people so that they are emphasized in your HTML document. But as usual, if you want to style your HTML, we can just use CSS as well to achieve this effect. Okay, next we have a form. So forms are used to we have a form. Forms are used to accept user input. For example, we have here an input of type text. So that uses a text field. So an important attribute of inputs are the type. So this determines what type of input it is. And then for the text fields, we have the placeholder attribute, which indicates what the placeholder or what text we see in the text field before we enter anything. So that's the placeholder attribute. We also have an input of type range. So this is a slider. So this is natively supported in HTML already. So we can input as attributes the maximum value, the minimum value, and then the default value. So if we change this to 50, for example, then you'll see that the slider is set at the center in the beginning. Then we also have checkboxes. Okay. Let's comment this out. Okay, so for checkboxes, you may notice that there's an additional tag here. So we have the label tag as well, which represents a caption in our user interface. So we use our label to, for example, for checkboxes, they don't have a label included. So we use the label tag to indicate what is the content of this choice or this input. So for checkboxes, you can select multiple. Okay, and unselect. There's another type of input that works like checkboxes, but we have the option of choosing that we only need to choose one. For example, for these radio inputs or radio button inputs, we can only choose one. So for our radio inputs to work, to restrict the input to only one, we need to set their names into the same values. So this is opposite to checkbox where we can select multiple. So for radio buttons, if we set their names to the same values, then we can select only one item from the group. So there's also a text area. So if, for example, you're writing a blog, then you need a text area because there will be a lot of text that you will be writing. For example, for comment boxes, this is also used. So this is like a text field, but with multi-line support. For example, you can type many lines here. So it also have the placeholder attribute, which indicates what we see before we type. Then we have an input type of color. So this is newly added in the recent years. So basically lets us choose a color. So as you can see, you have values here, RG, red, green, and blue values, and you can choose whatever color you like. So for me, this is the coolest input type in HTML. So you can use RGB, you can also use HSL, you can even use hex. And you can even just use the eyedropper tool to select a color. So that's it for the input of type color. And then we have buttons such as that lets us submit the form. So when we press this button, notice that the page refreshes because this form has an attribute of action. So usually if you have a backend server for your site, then the action refers to the URL on which you submit the data in these fields. So that's why if we have an input of type button, it tries to refresh because it sends another request to this URL. So since this is empty, it just refreshes because it submits to itself. So aside from buttons, we also have inputs for date and time. So input of type date and then input of type time. So here you can choose a date. It will show you a calendar, and here it will show you selection for the time. Okay. That's it for forms and inputs. Next, we have the HR tag. So HR tag is HR stands for horizontal rule. It's basically the HR puts a horizontal line between elements. So for example, I have an H1 tag of hello and then an H1 tag of world, and between them is a horizontal rule. So you can see a line between them. Another thing that goes between elements is the BR tag. So for the BR tag, it's like the horizontal rule, except that there is no line that you can see. So BR tag stands for line break. So if you have multiple paragraphs, you can insert a BR between them, or you can also insert this BR within the tag. So for example, here you insert it, then the paragraph breaks at this point. So there's a line break here. And you can also, as you can notice, we use less than and greater than signs or the angle brackets in our HTML. So if you want to use them as content, then it will be very hard. So instead, HTML supports writing character entities. So for example, less than is represented by this ampersand, then LT, and then semicolon. And then greater than is ampersand, GT, and then semicolon. So if we run this, you can see that we have those characters. So that's it for the basic tags and attributes of HTML. And are there any questions? You can type your questions in the chat, okay? If you have questions, and I will try to answer them if there's time. Okay, let's move to semantic HTML. So like I mentioned earlier, you can write your website only using H1 and then div tags, but that is not typically recommended. So if we open this in our live server, websites, they typically have a set structure. So for common website, you have a header, and then you have some sidebar, and then you have your main article, and then a footer. So semantic tags, basically they tell what type of content is contained inside them. So for example, our header tag contains the header of our site. So you can put your logos in here, you can put your navigation in here. So for example, here I put my navigation in the footer. So you have a footer tag that contains the nav tags and then an unordered list of links. So you can put this footer at the top. There's no restrictions really. It's just for semantic purposes, which lets other developers understand the structure of your site easier and more readable. Okay, so that's it for HTML. Any questions about HTML, guys? If there is none, we will proceed to CSS. Okay. So let's proceed to CSS. So first, let's talk about CSS. So CSS is the style of our website. So CSS can be put in HTML in 3 basic ways. So first, you can put in your head tag a link tag with an attribute rel or relationship of style sheet, and then an href. Href is like, it's similar to src. So you put the link of the resource. So for example, here I have styles.css. So I have styles.css here. So let's comment this out first and see what our body looks like. So let's open this in our browser. So we have here an empty page. So our styles.css contains some styles for the body tag that sets its background color to red. So if we try to uncomment this linking to an external style sheet, we see that the styles that are defined here are applied to the document because they are linked. So instead of linking to external sites, you can also just put a style tag at the head of your document. So style tags are put at the head of the document and not at the body, okay? So here we have a similar style to the external style sheet. It also applies to the body, so they are in conflict actually because this sets the background color to red. This sets the background color to blue. So if we save this, you will notice that the body is having a background color of blue. So what's notable here is that there is a precedence in how you link your styles to your HTML. So for example, external style sheets have lower precedence than internal style sheets. For example, even if I move this here, so their precedence is determined by the order that the styles are parsed, rather, because if you link here, it's basically appending to this style. So for example, this is precedence and then in CSS, because as the term suggests, for CSS, the CSS stands for cascading style sheets. So the styles will cascade. For example, your browser will read that the body has a background color of blue, and then after reading the external style sheet, it will parse it, then it will read that the body has a background color of red. So it will apply the last style that it encountered if there are conflicting styles. Okay, so there's a third way of putting styles in our HTML, and that is by inlining the style into the tag itself. So for example, our body tag here, let's put a style attribute of background color of yellow. So here, it does not matter if how the styles are parsed, because inline styles take the most precedence. So if you have inline styles, no matter what styles you define in your external and internal style sheet, the style in the tag itself will take precedence. Okay, so this is it for linking CSS. Next, let's go to the basics of CSS. Okay, so let's talk about CSS selectors. So let's open this in our browser. So I have a couple of HTML elements here. We have heading, and then we have all the other headings, and we have a paragraph, and then we have a button. So our heading contains an attribute called ID. So ID and then other headings contain an attribute of class. So these two attributes are very important in HTML because they can be used as selectors. They are usually used as selectors in CSS and in JavaScript. So what is the difference between ID and class? So usually you use ID if it's a unique item in your document. For example, in this HTML file, there's only one heading 1. So I put an ID. However, there are multiple other headings here. So I use a class. So if you have multiple things that are the same, you can use a class. And then if you have unique items, then you use the ID. So this ID and class can be used as selectors in CSS. So if we use them in our CSS, we can target these elements. So here we also have ID and etc. So first, how do we target the ID of our elements? So in our CSS, notice that this is an external style sheet because external style sheets are usually the most recommended of linking of CSS so that you don't clutter the HTML. So here we target the heading 1. So to target IDs, we use the hash symbol. So now we have hashtag heading 1. So hashtag heading 1, then we use curly braces to indicate a style block. So there are many properties in CSS. So if you're using VS Code, then you can see how many properties are here. So I won't discuss them one by one. So we can just follow along and then see the properties that we will be using. And you can also search in the internet for different style properties in CSS. So typically you use the color property to set the text color. And for background color, then you use the background color. So CSS properties are usually very readable and they can be understood just by reading them. So if we want to target the ID, we use the hash. So if we want to target classes, on the other hand, we use a dot notation. So for example, here, dot other heading is used to target all the elements that have the class of other heading. So if we save this, so all the elements that have the class of other heading will have their color turned to green. So for example, we have a p tag here. If we put a class of other heading here, then that style will be applied to this element as well. Okay. So that's how you define styles. And you can also just reference actually the tag itself. For example, here we target the p tag. So there's only one p tag here, so the style will be applied to just this element. So for example, here we change its font family to Verdana, or we can change it to career. So notice here, if I have two conflicting style properties, then it chooses the last style that is parsed. So it will choose to use the second one in the font family. So we also set it to bold and then text decoration to underline. And aside from targeting the tag itself, we can also target states. So for example, here I have the paragraph tag as an ID of hover me. So if we put colon and then we can see different states in this element. So one useful state is the hover state. So basically, when we hover over this element, these styles in the style block will be applied. So as you can see, if we hover over this p tag, and a background color of red will be applied. There is also a focus state. So for example, when buttons are pressed, they are focused. So if we target the button, which has an ID of focus me, and we target that button and then we apply the style of bordered 2 pixels with solid and the color of yellow. Then when we press this button, you can see that the style here is applied to the button. So that's it for selectors. Next is for positioning. How do we position elements in CSS? Okay. So first, I will show you the box model in CSS. So every element in our HTML follow the box model. So this rectangle here represents your content. This can be text, image, or this can be a video. And then, for example, it has a container that contains the text. So an H1 is a container for the text inside it. So for example, you have a div that has text inside it, and you give it some padding, then the padding will be, your div will have this size, and then your content of the text will be this one, and then there is a space here which represents the padding. And then after the padding is the border of your element. So if you set these properties in your CSS, then the total size will be this one. border plus the padding, and then plus the content. And finally, we have the margin. So this is the edge of your margin. So the margin is not included into the total size of your elements. However, this type of the default way is that the total width and height of the element calculates does not calculate into account the padding and the border. So I will demonstrate this one. So for example, here I have an element with an ID of box model, and then we have a rectangle. So in our styles, we have our rectangle here. Let's save this. So you can see that I have a rectangle here. So let me remove the padding, border, and margin first. Okay. So this is our rectangle. It has a width of 400 and a height of 300 pixels. So if you notice, if I try to add some padding into it, save this one, the size of the element actually increases. So the size of this, the total size of this element, if we inspect this one in our window, okay, if you inspect this one, you can see that its size now is 500 by 400 instead of 400 by 300. And that's because there is padding in each side of this rectangle, which adds 100 to each side, or 100 to each axis, so 50 at each side. That's why its total size becomes 500 by 400. And the same thing applies when we apply a border. So for example, we apply a border of 50 pixels. So now if we look at the size of this rectangle, it is now 600 by 500, adding another 100 pixels to each axis. So this is very confusing, especially if you are trying to size elements. So that's why developers usually put this selector at the top of their styles. So it's a reset to all the elements. So you notice that there's an asterisk here. This selector basically selects everything, every element. So here we specified that all of them should have a margin of 0 and padding of 0, which resets them so that their size is not affected by margin and padding. And then we have box sizing of border box. What box sizing does is that, if we comment this one, what box sizing does is that if you specify a width and a height, then it will take into account the padding and border into calculating that width and height. So for example, if we uncomment this box sizing here, you can see that our object reverts to its original size that we specify in our CSS, 400 pixels in width and 300 pixels in height. So box sizing border box property typically makes it easier to size and visualize our elements. That's why for me, I usually put this at the top of my styles. Okay. So that's for the box model and box sizing. So let's comment this out, then comment this. So now let's talk about position. So for example, I have a container here. Let's comment this out. Okay. And then comment this. So I have a container here, the div, and then I have an element inside of it. So if we put them together, then usually the div is inside of the container. So our container has 500 pixels in height and 500 pixels in width. It has background color of red. Okay, and then for our absolute element, this one, it has a size of 50 by 50 and then a background color of yellow. So disregard these properties first. So if we want to position elements, by default, they are positioned in a static way. So their positioning is based on the order that they are in the element. So For example, this element, if we want to position it somewhere else, then we can position it using the fixed attribute. So, for example, the relative container, we want to position it somewhere in the viewport or in the screen. So we can use position fixed, and then we can specify a top property, for example, 200 pixels. So it will put it 200 pixels from the top, and then you can also specify left 100 pixels. So it will put it 100 pixels to the left. So let me uncomment this style. So basically, I have a long div element that is extending just that is very long. It's a long container. So as you can see, as we scroll down in this page, the position fixed will keep our element to the specified position. Hence why we call it fixed. There's also another type of positioning, which is relative. So relative positioning it means that the element is positioned relative to its original position. So for example, if we remove this top and left, the original position of the element is at the very top left corner of the page. So if we specify some top and left here, it will be moved relative from that position. So 200 pixels from the top of that position and 100 pixels from the left of that position. So you notice, compared to fixed, the element stays on its position instead of staying in the viewport. Okay. We also have an absolute position. So for absolute position, it is position relative to the closest position element. So for example, our container here has a position relative property. So this absolutely positioned element will be positioned relative to this container because it is the closest element that is positioned. So if I save this one, for example, so I specified that it's 0 pixels from the right and 0 pixels from the bottom. So now this element, this yellow square, is now positioned relative to this container because it is the nearest position. So for example, if I remove this position in the relative container, then the absolute element will now be positioned in reference to the body because there are no positioned elements anymore. So that's how absolute positioning works. We also have so we also have positions of a value of sticky. So what sticky does is that when we scroll down, if the element that we have assigned the position sticky reaches the position that we have specified, then it will stay with that position if we it's basically it will stay in that position if we try to scroll. So let's see here. Oh, it's not scrolling. I guess. Yeah. Okay. For example, here, this header has an ID of sticky, and we target it using the hashtag. And then, for example, we have a paragraph above it. So once we scroll and then the header reaches the 0 pixels from the top, then it will stay there. Hence the term sticky positioning. Okay. So that's it for positioning. Any question, guys? Okay, let's continue to the Flexbox model. So as I mentioned earlier, I won't be discussing everything. So there's another type of laying out HTML elements such as the grid system, but I won't be discussing them because I am not using them as much. So let's see this example. Okay, like the previous example, we reset the styles, and then here I have a container. I did with an ID of container, and then inside it are 10 boxes. So all of this box has a class of box. And as you can see, this box has a size of 100 by 100. And then this box contains some numbers as text. And then its font size is 50 pixels. And then for background color, it is red. Okay. So for Flexbox, Flexbox stands for flexible box. So there are two things that is needed in a Flexbox. First, you need to set a container, a Flex container, and then all those children of the Flex container becomes Flex children. So for example, I have the container here. What Flexbox does is, for example here, we can change the display property into Flex. So this will convert the container into a Flex container. So if we save this, as you can see, the size of the boxes no longer matter. They are cramped into a single row. So the default direction for Flexbox is Flex row. So here, all the boxes are now in a row. So we can have a gap between them. So if we specify how many pixels the gap is, that will be the amount of pixels of spaces for each of the elements. Then since we don't specify how the Flexbox wraps, then all elements are confined into just one line. So for example, if we set our flex wrap property to wrap, then the element size are now respected, and then overflowing elements are just wrapped into the next line. For example, if I resize this browser, as you can see, the elements just wrap if I resize them. So the default direction of Flexbox is row. So we can also specify another direction, which is column. So if we specify the direction to be column, then our elements, Flex elements, will now be positioned vertically in a column. So there are other types of direction as well. So as you can see, this is ordered in the order that they are placed in our HTML. So if we put column reverse here, you can see that the order is now reversed in a column still. So there's also row reverse, which reverses the order. So as you can see in row reverse, you can notice that the flex elements are not really reversed per se, because here the first element is 6, and that's just because in this line, it's the last element in this container. So it's not really reversing the order of the elements, but just the order that they appear in a flex line. Okay. So that's it for, let's go to another example in Flexbox. So I have here 2 boxes, 3 boxes rather, and then okay. So I have 3 boxes here, and they have each color, green, yellow, and then blue. So 1, 2, 3, box 1, 2, 3. So if we put them into a container, our container here has a background color of gray, and we have a padding of 50 pixels, and it's also a flex container. So let's remove this first. So as seen earlier, if we put a gap here of 10 pixels, then there is a gap. So here's how the order can be changed in your flex children, really, instead of just the flex direction. For example, box 1 is first, box 2, and box 3. So all of them by default have an order of 0. So for example, if I comment out the orders here, so they are by default in the order that they appear in the HTML document. So if I put 1 in the order of box 1, you can see that it moves to the last position because since all of these elements have 0, then they have greater precedence in the ordering, and then box 1 will be the last. So if I comment out the other, so you can see that it's back because it's first, second, third order again. However, if I reshuffle their orders, for example, 2, 1, 3, you can see that box 2 is now in the order of 1, in the first order. So it's now positioned first. And then box 1 is now positioned second. So if we put this as 3 and then this is 2, then you can see that the order now is changing as specified. Okay, so let's remove these orders again for now. Okay, so in Flexbox, there's a so-called main axis and then a cross axis. So for the default direction, which is row, and that is in the horizontal direction. So you can think of its main axis as in the horizontal direction as well. So for column, flex direction column, your main axis will be in the vertical direction. So you can use these axes to position these elements. For example, if I want to, let's comment this out, and then let's put these styles so that they are of different styles, are of different sizes rather. So for example, if this is in a row direction, if I want to align these items in their main axis to be centered, then I can use the property align items centered. So that centers these elements in their main axis because row's main axis is in the horizontal direction. Okay, so I can use start, which is the default. So it's aligned at the start, at the top of the main axis, at the top, at the top. And then I can also use end, which is at the bottom along the main axis. So that's how align items work for the row direction. So there's also justify content, which aligns these elements in the column axis. So it's not along, it's actually in perpendicular to the cross axis. And that's the same in the main axis earlier. So if I justify this content center, then perpendicular to the cross axis, which is vertical, then they are centered. So if this is n, then they will be at the end of the axis perpendicular to the cross axis. So there are others as well. So we can use space between, which justifies these items with the greatest amount of space possible in between them. So that's space between. There's also space evenly, which puts even spacing at the left and right of the elements. So notice that this space here is equal to this space here, to this space here, and this space here. Because there's another property which is space around, in which the space of the elements is in relative to the element itself. So this space here is equal to half of this space here because the space here is also present in the other elements. So that's how justified content works. So when you specify the flex direction to column, then this align items and justify content, basically they swap each other, because if we use the column flex direction, so our main axis is now at the vertical direction, and then our cross axis in the horizontal direction. So now if we align this item center, then it's now at perpendicular to the main axis. So that's the difference. So instead of justify content for the horizontal axis, like in the row, now it's in the align items. So that's a caveat that we should take note of. So you can justify content space around, but it will not work because it's already cramped in there. So aside from that, let's go back to row. So here it's aligned, the items are aligned at the center, and then the content are justified with space around. You can also align their cell. You can put properties in the item itself so that they are aligned however you want. For example, if box 1, I want it to be aligned at the end. So I can align cell and flex end. And it will align itself to the end of the container, even if the aligned items here is specified as center. So you can also go flex start. So now this item is aligned at the start of the flex container, even if the aligned item specified in this property here is centered. So that's basically it for Flexbox, guys. So I hope you understood Flexbox. Okay, so now let's jump to JavaScript. Okay, so this is our HTML file for our JavaScript. And then, so JavaScript is a scripting language. It's the programming language in the three web technologies. It's the actual programming language. And then it's a scripting language that can be linked in two ways. So like the style tag, we also have a script tag. So you can just write your JavaScript inside the script tag. But usually, like CSS, the script file is actually an external file that is loaded using the script and the source attribute. So let's remove this script tag here. So this is our script.js. So let me introduce you to the console. So our browser has a console window. If you go to your inspect the elements and then go to the console, then you have this little terminal. So any JavaScript that is executed here is valid. So you see, I can do 1 + 1 and it will output 2. So the first thing that you should learn about JavaScript is the file extension ends with .js. So once we link our JavaScript into our HTML file, then it will be loaded when this HTML file loads. So you note that this script file is placed just before we close the body tag. This is because we want to load this script after these things have been loaded. If we don't need this script to wait until these elements have loaded, we can also put it into the head tag. But we won't do that here because we want these elements to be loaded before we execute this script. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to show you is how we can log to this console. We can output to this console because this is a very common command used when debugging and developing with JavaScript. So the command here is console.log, and then you can basically put anything in here and it will be logged into the console. For example, as with any tradition in programming, let's log the text hello world. So if we save this and then the page refresh, we can see that hello world is printed into our console. So we need to understand that JavaScript executes code from top to bottom. So for example, let's comment this one and let's say hello world 1, and then let's copy this line multiple times. Hello world 1, so hello world 1, hello world 2, hello world 3. So if we save this and reload our page, we can see that the console logs these strings in the order that they have been encountered from top to bottom. So this is how JavaScript executes our code. Just for executable code, functions are handled differently, but that's for another topic. So we can write comments in JavaScript using //s. So this // is for single line comments. Then we can also use multi-line comments using a / and 2 asterisks, and then 1 asterisk for each line, and then closed with an asterisk, and then a /. So this is an example of a multi-line comment. So now let's talk about how we declare variables. So older versions of JavaScript declare variables using the var keyword. So for example, var num1 or just var 8 = 1. So this is valid JavaScript. However, what we need to understand is that this type of declaring variables is not scope unlike other programming languages. So new, if we console.log this, okay, you can see that we can log this variable. So this is okay, but the more recommended way of declaring variables is the let keyword. So let b equals 2. So we can console log b also. So that's 2. So aside from variables, you store data in variables that are changing. So there are also another type, which is a const, c equals 3. So basically a const is a variable that which you cannot reassign. So for example, if we c equals 4, if we reassign it, so we will get a type error. So it says that assignment to constant variable error at line 18. So this will result in an error if we reassign a const. So we use const when we know that the data we stored in there will not change. So that's it for declaring variables. And now we can move to arithmetic operations. So for example, any arithmetic operations can be done in JavaScript. There's a lot of arithmetic operations. We can add two numbers. So save that. 1 plus 2 equals 3. We can subtract two numbers just using their variables. Okay. We can multiply two numbers. We can divide two numbers. And we can even raise a number using double asterisks. So this is 1 raised to 3. So let's change this to b. And then, as you can see, this is 2 raised to 3, which equals 8. And aside from arithmetic operations, there is also a built-in library to JavaScript, the math library. So this contains a lot of methods for mathematical computations, such as absolute, arc cosines, hyperbolic arc cosines, and so on and so forth. So it's just good to know that there is a built-in mathematical library. So next, we will move to string interpolations. So let's say we have a variable name, and this is, but we can declare strings using the quotation marks. So you can use double quotation marks. You can also use single quotation marks. It does not matter. It's just that what you start with should be the end. So, and then there's no similar characters inside. So you can, if I use double quotation marks here, I can't use another double quotation mark here because that will result in an error. Instead, I can use the other quotation mark. So let's say we have a name of Mark. So just a side note, JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. So it does not matter what type you assign to a variable. For example, if I declare a here to be an integer, I can redeclare it to be a string somewhere around the program. So that's because JavaScript is dynamically typed. It has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's just good to know that it's dynamically typed. Okay. So for example, let's go back to string interpolation. So for example, I have a first name, Mark, and then I copy this one. Then we have last name, Sarah. And then if I console log, so we can declare a full name here, plus first name plus a space, and then plus a last name. So this is how string interpolation works in JavaScript. So you can use the plus symbol to add strings. So if we console log full name, you can see that the strings have now been interpolated. So there is another way of interpolating strings, and that is by using template literals. So you see the backtick symbol at the bottom of your escape key. Those are backticks. And then using backticks, then you can put variables in here using this notation, $ and curly braces. So if I put first name here and then add a space, and then I can put another variable here, last name. So that will work the same. So this is a much more cleaner syntax in interpolating strings. Okay, so enough about string interpolation. Let's talk about objects in JavaScript. So objects are defined using curly braces, and then inside them are key value pairs. So we have a key here, and then a colon, and then its value. So let's console log this variable to see what it looks like. So if console log post, you can see that we have here an object, and it has two properties, body and then title. So we can access this property using the dot notation. So if we want the title, we go post.title. So that's your title, or post.body for the body. So when we are accessing APIs, for example, if there are third-party services that provide data, typically they provide those data using objects or as JSON or JavaScript object notation. So this is very important to know how we can access data using in an object. So accessing data is through that notation. We also have arrays. So let my array equals, so arrays are declared using square brackets. So for example, let's have an array of fruits. Orange, apples, and bananas. So if we console log this, save and refresh, we see that we have an array of 3 items, orange, apples, and bananas. Notice that like other programming languages, JavaScript is 0 indexed. That means that in an array, the first item always has an index of 0. So if we want to access the first item, we use the square bracket notation and then put the index in there. So we want to access the item that has a 0 index in the fruits array, and then let's console log it. So we get orange, and so on and so forth. We can even use negative, but that will result in undefined. So next, we have control structures. So like other programming languages, there are control structures in JavaScript that lets us handle some things. So we have if statements. It's declared like this. So we can declare a variable. So let log equals true. So if we can check that variable here, if log equals true, so just like that. So that's the if statement. So if we turn this into false, then it will not log anything because it's a false. So we can also use else statements after if. So this is very similar to other programming languages. So if this is true, then it's logging, and then if it's false, and then it's not logging. So there's also a switch statement, and then let's try one. So you put the variable which you want to. So switch statement is a better way of executing code depending on a condition. So here we can define a case, and then if the case is 1, and then we console log here, and then it's important that you always break it. So if this is 2, then there will be no console. So we can duplicate this one, and then so console. Now you see how this is going. So if you have this condition is having multiple values, for example, if this goes on to 50, then it will be troublesome to just use if else statements. So this is the way you use switch statements if there are multiple conditions. Then next, what sets apart JavaScript from other programming languages is that it can interact with the HTML document or the DOM. So DOM stands for the document object model. It is basically object model of the whole HTML document. So if we console.log our document, so we have our document object here. So you can see that it logs all the nodes of our document. So like CSS, there are also selectors in JavaScript. So for example, in our index.html, we have here a heading with an ID of heading. So in our JavaScript, we can target this heading tag using document.query selector. So using query selector, we can put here, just like in CSS, the selector is a hash as well. So let's put hash heading. And then let's assign this to a variable of heading. So now if we console.log this heading, we see that it returns to us the element itself. So for example, this. So when we have our node or our element, then we can also do a lot of things. So for example, our heading, we can set its inner text property or inner HTML property into whatever we want. So for example, if we want it to be so as you can see, even if at our original file, the text inside the heading tag is this is a heading, then if we change it in JavaScript, then it will also be changed. So we can also select classes in JavaScript. So for example, let's select all the classes that have all elements that has the class of heading 2. So like in CSS, we select using the dot notation. So we can console.log heading 2. So what you will notice here is that there's only one element of heading 2, and that's because we just use query selector. So if we use query selector, then it just returns the first element that satisfies the condition. So here we have multiple heading 2s. Then if we have multiple heading 2s, then we can use the query selector all so that we can select all of those things, and then it will return a node list of all the nodes. So as you can see, there are 4 items because we have four elements of that has a class of heading 2. Okay, so that's it for the DOM. And JavaScript also has events. So for example, there are a lot of events for JavaScript. So if we hover over the document, there are a lot of events. For example, we have on-click events, on-blur events, on-close, on-cut, on-drag start, on-drag end. So there are a lot of events in the document itself. So all the elements also inherit those events. So for example, let's target this button element, this one. So this button has an ID of my button. So to get this element, let's use the query selector again. The query selector. And then to target that button, it has an ID of my button. So we'll use the hash notation. And then let's console.log the button to see if we got the right element. So this is the button. So it seems we have taken the right element. So now we can target this button. There's a method of add event listener. So the first argument is what type of event. So if we want to listen for clicks here, then we put click as a string here, and then it receives a function as the second argument. So anything that you put in this function block will be executed when this button is clicked. So for example, let's use the alert function to so if we click this button, you can see that the code here executes, so we receive an alert. So that's how we add event listeners to the different events in the DOM. Okay, let's move to manipulating the DOM. So for manipulating the DOM, like I demonstrated earlier, we can select elements and then set different properties to those elements. So for example, here, let me comment out these things. Okay. Okay. So first we can manipulate the DOM, and also we can create document elements. So for example, we use the create element to create an h4 tag and then assign it to the h4 variable. Then we set its inner text or the text inside those tags to a string. So here I am not really h4, and then we can append this tag to anything that we want. So for example, we have an h3 tag here. So we target it with document query selector, and then we use the function append child to append this this node or this element into the h3 tag. So here we have the the h3 tag that says put h4 below me. And so if we save this, then the element will be appended into the h3 tag. So if we inspect this one, you see that inside the h3, there is now an h4 inside it because we append the element inside the h3. So we can also append it to its container. We just need to select this container instead of the h3. So that's it for manipulating the DOM. Just a side note, these are just the very basic, guys. Okay, there are still a lot of more complicated things, but these are just the most basic that you need to learn if you want to just start learning. So next, if we want to get data from third-party services, for example, if we go to this site, this is a free site. This is a free site that provides an API so that we can test we can use to test. So if we want to reach for other servers for some data, then JavaScript has a built-in function called fetch. So this fetch accepts a URL and then some options for the request. So for HTTP, there are a lot of methods such as a GET request, and then there's also post request, put request, delete request, but the most common is the GET request. So for example, in our API, we can use the fetch function to fetch from this URL. So if we type this code into our browser, you can see that when we request for this URL, there are data that are coming back. And these are all, if you can still remember, these are all in object notation. So if we fetch for this URL, we say fetch that, and then open parentheses URL, and then we chain a function that is .then, because this fetch URL returns a promise, and when we request data from other servers, then it will take time. And since JavaScript is single-threaded, then it cannot block the code. So we use .then so that it completes asynchronously. So we use .then, and then it accepts a function that receives the response from where we requested. So if we fetch from this URL, the response will be returned in this function. So now we can handle that response, and this is typically the usual way of processing data from a server. So we use fetch and then URL, then use that response and return its JSON method. Then this will return the data in its JSON format. So for example, we have posts here. If we console.log this post variable inside here, you can see that the data that we have achieved earlier are stored now in the posts variable. So this is an array of objects. So if we want, like mentioned earlier, if we want just the first one, so we can see that this post object has a body, a title, an ID, and user ID property. So now we can use these things to like append it to our HTML. So for example, let's give this container an ID of post container. So we can use the for loop. Okay, so this is the for loop in JavaScript. Basically, it loops over an iterable, or for example, it starts at index 0, and then for the length, we can use, since the post is an array, there is a length variable in here, and so we can use it to console log things that are index, to console log those posts. So we can access individual posts by looping over using a for loop. So now what we can do is that we can retrieve this post container. So post container using the document.query selector again. And the ID for that is post container. So now that we have access to our container, we can create elements in our for loop like we did earlier. So let h2, for example, equals document that create element. And unlike earlier, we create an h4 element, here we create an h2. And then let's set the inner text, that h2 element, to the post title. So let's access the post in the current iteration, and then its title. And then let's append it to our post container. So let's see the result here. So as you can see, we now have a lot of h2 elements because we append every title of the posts that we get from this URL. So that's the end of the basics of JavaScript, guys. So we will use all the things that we have learned in here in creating a weather app later after the break. So this weather app, so this is how it looks like. So it fetches from an external API that fetches for the weather depending on the city that you input here. So it will give us a latitude and longitude, the data for temperature, humidity, precipitation, and wind speed. So that will be after the break. So that's it for my discussion for basics of core web technologies. Let me give the floor back to our hosts so that we can take a break first. Thank you, guys. See you later.
Yan. So, kumusta kayo, guys? Okay pa ba?
Gising pa ba kayo, guys?
Gising pa ba kayo? Alive pa ba kayo? Reminder lang na uminom kayo ng water or mag-snacks. Baka gutom kayo or whatever. So, at this juncture, ang gagawin natin ay meron tayong icebreaker, a little icebreaker. Kasi
Short lang siya.
baka nasa fatigue na kayo. Nakaka-feel na kayo ng fatigue. So, whiteboard please.
So guys, we need
Whiteboard.
2 participants.
Okay,
2 participants para i-draw dito sa whiteboard kung ano ang reaction or na-feel nyo during the first part sa ating technical session.
Para magawa nyo yan, click view options and then there's annotate. So you can click annotate and then you can start drawing and something like that. Ayan.
Okay, any participants?
Magtatawag ba or volunteer?
So kung walang volunteer,
ito, magtatawag tayo kasi wala atang mag-volunteer.
Oh, okay,
Volunteer si
Ortiz daw.
Jolo. Sige, go.
Sige.
So, how are you feeling right now? What did you feel after the introduction of the basics? Oh, ikaw?
Yes,
Yes.
drawing.
Para interactive tayo. Oh, okay.
Okay, happy siya.
Oo, happy.
Marami
Ito.
siguro siyang na-learn.
Mention. Si Alan 𝐼𝐴 siya yung nauna kong nakita sa participant. Baka gusto mo
Mr. Alan
magsulat. To write, you can click view options and then annotate. Yan. Star.
May malaking star ang
balita
ating...
ko nga pala. May participants tayo dito from Negros. Ano yun? Ano yun na university? Negros?
Negros Oriental. Yes.
Chat naman kayo dyan. Good morning. Thank you for joining our webinar.
So, wala nang volunteer pa for the...
Baka gusto niyo
baka
magsulat
may
lang,
gusto
guys.
mahiya
Like,
lang.
whoever
Okay
you
lang.
want. Okay lang. Go ahead. Pang ano lang to, pampakalma, pampa-refresh. Kasi baka medyo stiff na kayo sa seats nyo. So, guys.
Oh, may nag-heart. My heart para sa ating technical speaker.
Go, guys.
So, marami
Ayan.
na video sa ating whiteboard.
So, nagsusulat na lang ako para, to interact. Ay, reminders pala, guys. After this icebreaker, merong activity na ipepresent si Mr. Casero. So, kung gusto nyo mag-participate, pag tama yung answers niyo and kasali kayo sa first 3 people na makakasubmit ng tamang answers, meron kayong prize, which is 50 pesos GCash.
First
So,
3 na makakatama na sagot.
Ayan, so madami ng laman yung
marami na nagjo-draw.
Hello, web.
Ayan. My heart broken.
Okay, so, okay na ba?
So, okay na? Na-refresh na ba ang lahat?
Okay na ba kayo?
Nabuhayan na ba ang ating mga participants?
Okay na. Sige, okay na.
So, okay.
So, thank you so much sa pag-participate ng little icebreaker namin, guys. And, babalik na namin ang spotlight kay Larry.
Okay, hi guys. Boy pa ba? Okay, so welcome back, no? Let me share my screen so that I can present the activity. Okay. So this is our activity. So if you go to the link that I will send into our chat box, so you will be redirected to this site. So basically, this is Flexbox Froggy. So the goal of this game is to make Froggy go into the lily pad. So there are different colors here. So for the first level, there is only green. So what you need to do is this pond, the blue-green container, is a flex container. So it has display flex. So you need to put the flex properties in this container with the corresponding values so that you can position this frog into this lily pad. So for example, here, this is the frog here. So this is flex container. So we know, right, that it's in a row. So if we want to put this frog into the other side in its perpendicular to the cross axis or the vertical axis, then we use justify content. So if we put here justify content and then press end. Then the frog will be back to its place or in the lily pad. So there are other levels as well. For example, here. So the original one is that they're here. And if we want to position them in the center, then we use justify content center. Okay, that's the gist of it. For example, here. So here, it's also the same in the same axis. So you can say justify content. And then you can just use trial and error if you want. For example, space around. Okay, that's the correct one. There's also space between. For example, if you choose space between, so the next button will not below if it's not the correct answer. So just try to you can just try different properties so that you can get the correct answer. So I wish everyone good luck. So the level that you will try to solve is level 7. So level 7, okay. So you can submit a screenshot of your work where the frogs are in their respective lily pads to our organizers. So they will just send you a Google form. So that's it for our activity, guys. You can do it anytime and there's no time limit. So let's go back to our agenda. So now we are at the second part of our technical session. So now we will create a very simple web application. So we will create a simple weather app. So this weather app looks like this. So it's not really the prettiest, but it's functional. So the user interface looks like this. So we have a title here, weather in, and then we have a text field, and then we have an icon, and then the latitude, longitude. We have an image with a text. So this image will be the icon for the weather, and then the text here will be the description of that weather. And then we have temperature, humidity, precipitation, and wind speed. So we have data over here. Then we have a button to fetch the data. So the API that we will be using comes from Weather API. So this is a free service. There are actually it's a paid service, but there is a free tier to its plan. So I've already signed in. So if you want to like create apps that need weather information, you can sign into Weather API. So here in my dashboard, you can see that I have an API key. So this is API key is very important because it is what we use so that we can request data from this API. So if we go to its here, API response field, we can see all the data that we can get from this API. So we have things like wind speed, wind degrees, wind direction, pressure. So there are a lot of data here. So let's go to its documentation. And then if we go to the example portion, we can see that we can get the data, the current weather for a location using this syntax, this URL. So api.weather.com/v1/current.json, and then question mark key, and this is where your API key goes. And then the Q field is the place that you want to query the current weather from. So this is what we want. And then I have already prepared the file. So we have a blank HTML document, just the boilerplate. We have a script.js with just 2 variables, our API key, and then we interpolated the URL with our API key here. And then Q equals, because we want to append the place that we get in the value in this text field. So let's close this one. Okay. So this is it. This is the user interface. So we have styles.css, which is also blank, just the reset properties that we discussed earlier. And we have an image of a cat, which will be a placeholder for the icons. in the beginning because we still have no icons here. So let's start. So first thing we need to do is we determine what are the elements of our app. So for example, here we have here our body. So let's run this in our live server so that you can see. So as you can see, the color of the body is blue, but that will be settled in our styles.css. So for now, but let's focus on the structure of the app. So for example, here we have an h1. Let's put an h1 for our title. We'll give it an ID of title. So based on our reference, this is whether in. So actually, we don't need to put an ID here because we will not be interacting with this element. So we don't need to actually select this one. So we can just forego it. So now we have a title, and then next for that is a text field. So for text field, we can use the input of type text here. So we now have a text field. So there's also a placeholder here. So let's add a placeholder of enter a city. Okay, that's looking okay. So next we have a bunch of elements. So we have here an icon logo, and then we have the latitude data and the longitude data. So for this, I prefer to use a div because later this data, we can position them as a Flexbox container so that we can position them as a row and then align them in the center. So let's take the icon first. So my go-to choice for icons is heroicons.com. So we can search here location. So here we can get a location icon. So we can copy this SVG directly and then paste it in our HTML. So if we go back, now we have an icon here. So we can style that later using CSS. So let's give this an ID of location icon. So after the location icon, we have, let's put an H4 with lat. And then let's create a span element because span are inline so that they will be in line with this lat text. So let's put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then since we are gonna change the data here eventually in our JavaScript, let's put an ID here of lat. So let's see that. So now we have lat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's do the same for the longitude. Okay, let's name this lon for its ID. Let's complete this. Latitude, just so it's clear. So now we have latitude and longitude. So they're not yet styled because we're just focusing on the HTML first. So we can give an ID here for location container as well. Okay. So we're using IDs because they are unique items, okay? So we just need to target one. So next we have here the icon and the weather data. So let's create another div with an ID of weather data or just weather. And then here we need an image or just an image. And its SRC will be, I have a cat image here in the current folder, so we can just use /cat.jpg. So you can put here the weather icon. So let's look at that. So here we have our cat already. So we can style it using CSS later. So now let's put another H4, and here we say no data. And then this H4, let's give it an ID of weather description. So let's have an ID for this image as well. Say weather icon. Okay. So after that, we have here a container, and we have here a lot of boxes. So here, this is where the classes come in because we have multiple elements that have the same style. So we can put a div with a class of let's say box. Let's say box. So inside the box, there is data for, let's have an h4 for the data. So let's say no data as well. And then let's give it an ID of temperature because this is for the temperature data. And then let's provide a description and temperature. And then we can copy and paste this 4 times because they're just the same things. We just need to change their IDs so that we can differentiate each other. So here we have humidity. Change this to humidity as well. And then we have precipitation. And then finally we have wind speed. Okay, so let's save this and then let's see. So here we are. They're not styled yet. And then finally we have a button at the bottom. So let's create a button and then let's put fetch data. So let's give the button as fetch button btn. So that's it. This is the structure for our HTML. So now we can now start to style our HTML using CSS. So first, to link our style.css to our index.html, we link it using the link tag. So that's /style.css. Okay. And while we are at it, let's also include our script as well. So since we will be using it later, so script.js. So now we have it here. So first thing you'll notice is that we have a blue background in our body. So let's target the body and then background color blue. Closer. Okay, now we have a background color of aqua. And then as you can see, we can create the body to be a flex container so that we can align these things, these flex children inside of it. So, or we can wrap all of these items in a container. So that's what I div with an ID of container so that we can target it in our CSS. So now there are no changes, but now we can target that container in our CSS, and then we can put here display flex. So as you may remember, for display flex, it is by default in a row. So we can put here flex direction volume, and then just like that, and then we can align the items center so that all of them are at the center. So now let's first change our font family to okay. So now we have this. Let's target this text field. So our text field is this one. Let's create an ID of location. So target the text field, location. Then let's give it some padding of 20 pixels. So as you can see, maybe it's too much, 10 pixels. So as you can see, the padding between the values have increased. Okay, so next is the location container. So we want it to be a Flexbox so that it will align the items as a row. So let's target the location container. And then display flex as well. So now it's in a row. So we can target the location icon as well. So we can set its size. So let's give it a width of just 10 pixels, which is too small. Let's go 30. Okay, I think that's okay. So now we can set our flex container for the location to have align items center so that they are aligned. Then we can have a gap of, for example, 10 pixels so that they're not too close to each other. So let also add some margin at the top, about 30 pixels. Okay. So now next we have our cat. Okay, so we have a weather container with weather icon and weather description. So let's target those. So weather container, display flex as well. So as you may notice, I'm using a lot of this Flexbox here. So flex direction column, because it just makes it makes layouting a lot easier. So you can target the weather icon. So let's give it a width of just 100 pixels. Okay, so and then a height of 100 pixels as well. Okay, now we have our icon here, and then let's align or justify the content so that they will be centered. And then align items, because we have already changed the to column. So next here is we need to style these boxes. Okay. Oh, our weather can. Okay, I was wondering why it's not working. It's just weather, it's not weather container. So now we can style these boxes. So to target the classes, we can use the dot notation, so that box, and then we can give them some width and some height. And let's first give them a background color of white. So now they have background color of white. Then let's give them some width of, say, 200 pixels. And that's too much, 150 pixels. And then a height as well of 150 pixels. So now they're square. So let's turn our boxes into flex containers as well, so that we can align the items. So flex direction to column, and then justify the content to center, and then align those items as well to center. So that's a little better. We can also give them a border radius. So you can see here, there's a lot of property, guys. So border radius, let's say 25 pixels. So now they're a little rounded. So we can also give them some box shadow. Box shadow, example, you can with 0, 0, 25 pixels, 25 pixels, and then yeah. So these properties, guys, so 0 here is for, I think this is for the left. Yes, this is for left displacement. So earlier the shadow is at the very center, the element is at the very center. So if we change this first value, then we displace the shadow to the left. And then if we change this second value, we displace it to the bottom. So the next value is the spread of the shadow. So if I go 5 pixels, so it's much more compact. So if we go 0 here, then it will be solid. So let's go for 10 pixels. And then here is 25 pixels is how large the shadow is. So if we go 0 here, so it's from the, I think it's from the z index of the you can just play around with these values, guys. So for example here, let's do 5, then 10 pixels, I think I will just keep it to 0. And then just pull them closer. Okay, I think that's okay. So now these boxes are contain a container. So let's give this ID box container so that we can turn it again into a, yes, you guessed it, a flex container. So let's target that box container. So display flex. So now they are aligned in a row. So this button should not be inside the flex container so that it goes to the next line. So we can do some gap here, like 10 pixels or maybe 20, so that they are a bit spread out. And then let's target the final element, which is the fetch button. So ID fetch button. So let's give it some padding, 10 pixels or 15. Then some margin top of 20 pixels, 40 pixels. Okay. So we can put them in the center since it does not really overlap in the page. Let's put some margin first in the box container. Margin top 50 pixels. Okay. The same with the weather. Okay. That there's some room to breathe in. Okay, let's give the body some padding, 20 pixels, so that they're not as close to the edge. And then we can set its height to 100 VH. So VH is a unit that stands for viewport height. So how large is the screen? That will be the value of 100 VH. So now we can turn this into a, we can put here justify content to center as well, so that we can center these things, and let's turn its height to 100%. So now all is at the center. Okay, so I think we are done with the user interface. So the final thing that we need to do now is to access our JavaScript. So the first thing that we need to do is to access all those documents, are all those elements that we need to have their data changed. So what are those elements? So we have the latitude or the lat, we have the lon, we have the weather icon, we have weather description, and then the different data. So let's do that first. So that lat equals document.querySelector, and then the ID that we gave it is lat, right? So that's that. So let's just copy this one multiple times because we'll be using this a lot. So for longitude, it's that lon. Then we have weather icon. And then let's change the variable name because it won't accept a dash. So we have weather icon, then weather description. Again, changing the variable name. And then we have temperature. And copy this more. We also have humidity. And then precipitation. Change this. And then wind speed. ID is wind speed. Right? Or wind underscore speed. Okay, so let's check our console if there are no errors. So I think there are no errors. And aside from those things that we need to change data from, let's also target the text field and then the button. because we will need to get some values from them. So let location, I will call it location, the text field. So its ID is also location. There's a question in the chat. Can we have a copy of the code for this weather app? Yes, of course. I will upload this to GitHub later, and then I will set it to public so that you can download it. And we will also use GitHub to upload it. We will use GitHub Desktop to upload it to GitHub, and then use our repository in GitHub to deploy it to a free hosting solution. So for the location, it's location, and then the fetch button. So let fetch btn plus document the query selector fetch button. Okay, I think that's it. So the first thing we need to do is, you guessed it, just like our example earlier for the fetch API, we need to fetch data from this URL. So let me paste this one. So we have a fetch URL that then, so instead of these things, we will be doing the changing of the text here instead of like earlier appending it. So it's just the same concept. So now we have data here. So, but before we can fetch some data, what we need to do is get the location that is entered in this text field, because we will append it to our URL. So the first thing that we need to do is that we need to set an event listener to our button. So let's target the fetch button that add event listener, so that let's register a click listener. So when we click our button, the code here executes. So to get the value of the text field, let's get it. So this is our text field element. So let the location, or let's say that place equals the location value. So first, let's console.log this place. So just so we're sure that we are getting the right thing. Okay, so location is not defined. Oh, I think location is a reserved word, so let's change this to text input. Okay, so let's comment this first, our fetch URL, because that will return an error because our query is incomplete since we don't have the place yet. So now if we press this button, so it returns an empty string because there is no data here. So if we enter 𝒉𝒂𝒧 here and then we press this button, then we have 𝒉𝒂𝒧. So now we have a place. So what we do with that place is that we append it to our URL. So let's put our fetch function here, URL, then we add the place that we have taken from the text field. Of course, before we do our fetch, we still need to check if the place is not empty. So let's check if place is not equal to an empty string. Or let's check if it is equal to an empty string. And if it is equal to, then we just return from this function and then we alert the user that there are no location entered. Okay, so now if we press this without entering a location, it will alert us. So after that, now we have some data here. So because our URL now is complete because we appended the place to our query string, then let's try to console log what is being returned by is fetch call. Okay, let's try Tacorong because that's where I'm from. So if we fetch here, we get data, we get an object that contains a current or the current weather and then a location. So if you hover over the location, you have latitude properties and longitude properties. So we can use this to put some data into the latitude and longitude elements. So aside from that, we have also the current weather. So we have in the condition, we have the description. So it is sunny in Tacorong, and then we have an icon. So we can use this source into the latitude. So into the weather icon, I mean. So we have here the wind in kilometers per hour, we have temperature, we have humidity, and then we also have, I think, yes, precipitation in millimeters. So since it is sunny, there's no precipitation. So we will use this data to change the text of the elements in our website. So that weather equals data. So now we have weather. So first, let's change our latitude. So let's get our latitude, that inner text was weather that location, as seen earlier, location dot lat. So let's try this again. Oh, wrong. Okay, so you see that the latitude here has changed. So you can do the same for longitude. So weather that location that longitude. So now if we enter Tacorong fetch data, this changes. So if we use these coordinates into Google Maps, it will redirect us to Tacorong, and you can try it if you want. So let's finish other things such as, so let's set the weather icon. Log again the data we have taken so that we know which properties we need to access. Okay, so the weather icon is in the current and then condition and icon. So we can take the weather icon, that set attribute. So here we need to set its SRC attribute to, let's see, HTTPS as append this, append it to weather that current that condition that icon. So that's weather that current A. So we have set the SRC. We also need to set the weather description. So inner text as well, it was same, weather that condition that weather that current that condition that text. Okay, and next we set the temperature. So it's weather that current that, so it's here, stamp C, and let's append a unit. So we can just copy paste this for 3 times. So because the location is now at the same level, so let's try humidity. It's at weather.current.humidity. So the unit for humidity is, I think it's just %. And then let's do precipitation. Then weather.current.precip. Let's use millimeters. Then put millimeters here. And then finally we have wind speed. So weather.current.longitude. let's use the kilometers per hour. WinKPH. Okay, let's try to save this and then pray that it works. So if you enter Taporong and you fetch, okay. So as you can see, it now works. So the icons change, the text change, temperature, that's it. So let's try General Santos City. Or just General Santos. If we fetch data, it's the latitude that's changed. So it's also sunny here. And then the same for temp. For Coronadal, if we fetch the data, so as you can see, the data is changing. So you can double check this in Google Maps, and these coordinates will lead you to the appropriate locations in the map. So that's it for our weather app. Okay, any questions on how we develop this? Hey, if there are no questions, we will proceed to deploying this app. So we're gonna deploy this app. We're gonna upload this app to GitHub and then deploy it in a free or hosting that is my favorite. For example, like I mentioned earlier, we will use GitHub Desktop. And then let me open my GitHub. So I am signed in already to GitHub, and I have quite a few repositories here. So I'm gonna create a new repository using the folder that we edited our weather app. So here I will add a local repository and choose the path of that. So it's in my projects, webinar, weather app. So this here. So if I select this folder, it will tell me that this is not a Git repository. So I will create a repository here instead, and then just leave it on the defaults. Okay. So as you can see, guys, by using GitHub, you have access to all the history of your files. So it tells you with the changed files, it tells you how many lines you've added. For example, here in this HTML, all these lines have been added. So I have in total 162 lines added, and all the lines that I have deleted. So if I publish changes to my code, I will see it also here. So there will be a complete set of history here of all the changes that I have created in my app. So, but for now, since you have no changes already and we have completed the web app, let us now publish this repository. So I will not keep this code private, so it's a public repository. And if I publish this, and after publishing it, then I will see it into my GitHub account. So if I search for it, now we have our weather app and it's public. So it's committed 1 minute ago. So I will copy its link and then paste it in our chat box. So if you want to download it, then you can. And then now comes deploying this site so that other users can see it. So my favorite hosting option, because they offer it for free, is Vercel. There are other options as well. There are free tiers in Firebase hosting. There are also GitHub pages if you want. And then there are also Netlify and others as well. And just take note that these free hosting services are mainly for front end, those that do not require a database. So if your site are just static pages or just normal websites or simple websites, then you can host it directly in here. Or if you really want data, then you can use Firebase because their free tier is quite generous in storing a database. So deploying an app or website in Vercel is very easy. You just need to create a new project, especially if you have imported already the repository. So import your repository. So let's import here. So it will ask me for options. I'll just leave them at the default just to show you how easy it is. So we have project name and deploy. As long as you have pushed your project into a repository, then it's just basically a one-click deploy. And now it's already here. So if you go back to my dashboard and go to deployments, we can visit here. then it's here. So I can paste this up, the URL in our chat app. So now you can access this and then do whatever you want. So you can try it. So that's it for creating a web app and deploying it. So there's little time left. So let me fast track some things that you also need to learn. So here, if you really want to pursue a career in web development, then you need to learn about web security knowledge. So we have HTTPS, which just has an extra S, and it's still HTTP. The S is just means it's secure. There's also cross-origin resource sharing, which allows us to share resources even if we are in different domains. Then we have CSP, or content security policy, which is a layer of security that prevents cross-site scripting between sites so that our users are not vulnerable from hackers. So there are also package managers. So typically when you develop web applications, then the problems that you encounter 99% of the time have been encountered by others. And there probably is someone out there that have already created a solution for that. So we have package managers here. For JavaScript, we have npm, and then there's also another alternative, which is Yarn. So by using these package managers, we can import libraries created by others into our own projects. And then we have CSS preprocessors, because admittedly, writing CSS is very hard. So CSS preprocessors basically power ups our productivity in writing CSS. It allows us to use nesting in our CSS properties. When you have nested data, then you can nest all the properties. It allows us to use variables, extensions, functions, and even loops and conditionals in our CSS. So basically now our CSS is now like JavaScript. We have if-else statements in there. So we also have build tools. If we are using npm, then most probably we'll use module bundlers if we want to build our project. So the most popular is Webpack. And then we have linters and formatters, which are more for quality of life. Prettier formats our code so that it's more readable and more, pretty. And then ESLint is for linting our code. It suggests best practices for the format of our code so that ensure that our code quality is okay. Next, if you have already learned about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's time to pick a front-end JavaScript library, because as you have noticed earlier, it's very troublesome to always do document.query selector. So if you're using a framework, most frameworks are based on reactivity. So you just declare your data, and then when those data change, then so is your user interface. So React is a popular. If you want jobs in web development, your best bet is React, because there are a lot of jobs finding React developers. So React is backed by Facebook. For Google, the framework that they back is Angular. And then there are also other frameworks such as Svelte and Solid.js and so on and so forth. It's an inside joke in web development that every day new JavaScript frameworks are born. So for state management for React, there is Redux. So just a side note, or pahapyaw na lang jud ni, how to become a backend developer. So backend development is for servers, right? So the same, you need to understand the internet, basic front-end knowledge. It does not mean that if you're a backend developer, you do not need to know the core web technologies such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then, most of all, you need to understand the operating system and general knowledge. So when we deploy our code, it is typically hosted in a virtual computer or a real computer somewhere in the world. And in that computer, there is an underlying operating system. So you need to understand how the resources of that computer works. So next, you need to understand, or you need to pick a language. There are a lot of language that you can learn for the backend. You can use PHP, Python, Go, Ruby, Java, C#, Rust, and also JavaScript. So if you want your life to be easier, you can just learn JavaScript and then pick front end. I use JavaScript for front end, use JavaScript for back end. For me personally, I use PHP, and then all of these languages typically have their framework of choice. So for PHP, there is Laravel. For Ruby, there's Ruby on Rails. And for Python, there is Django. And then, so we store your data. So typically it's in databases. So we have two most common types, relational and NoSQL databases. So for relational database, the key here is that it requires a strict schema. So, and it supports the relationships of those tables with each other. While in NoSQL databases, they are more focused on flexibility because there is no set schema. So one document can have multiple fields that are different from the other document in the same collection. So an example of NoSQL database is Firebase Firestore or MongoDB. For relational database, it's MySQL or PostgreSQL. So relational databases typically use the SQL or the structured query language. Next, for backend development, you need to understand API. So the API that we use for our weather app, it was developed by a backend developer. So you need to understand how you throw those responses to your consumers, such as the developers for the front end, so that it can make their life easier. So for example, we have our browser here, and then it sends a request through the internet to our backend, and then using our API. Because you cannot use our browser to communicate directly to our web server. For example, if I'm using PHP in our backend, so I can't use JavaScript to access those PHP files. So typically, there's an API that sits in the middle that converts those things so that they can understand each other. So the it's the same that happens in web servers and databases, because database, if they use SQL and web server use PHP, there's an API somewhere in between that translate for each other so that they understand each other. And then caching, this is a little bit more advanced. If you have data that is not changing frequently but is accessed very frequently, then your best bet for improving performance is to cache the data. So for example, you have a database. Instead of reading in the database every time data is accessed, you can cache the data in the RAM or in the memory, so the reading is faster. Then we have automated testing. This is different from manually testing. Automated testing, you basically write code that tests your application. So it builds confidence and prevents regression in the code because, for example, if you introduce some changes or new features in your web application, as long as you run this automated test and they are all passing, then you are confident that there are no bugs in your application. So, but you need to ensure that you have good test coverage. And next, we have CI and CD. It stands for continuous integration, continuous deployment. For example, Facebook, there are 1 billion users. So if there is no continuous integration and continuous deployment in place, then if they introduce some changes, they will have to bring the server down, upload their code, and then bring it up. And that will not take a short time. So the users will experience what we call downtime. So CI/CD is in place so to prevent that downtime. So it basically automates the building and testing and deployment of the applications. And then, so the user, it will only swap the versions of the website or application so that users don't experience downtime. So we also have monolithic architectural patterns such as monolithic apps, where apps are built in one piece, and then, or microservices apps where the features of the apps are decoupled with each other so they don't affect each other. And we have SOA and CQRS, and these are a bit too advanced already. We have event sourcing, where unlike traditional storing of data, you store events instead. So for example, in banking, instead of storing the remaining balance, we store the withdrawals and the deposit transactions. And when we replay those events, it will basically eventually lead us to the remaining balance. And then we have serverless platforms. So the best example for this is AWS Lambda. So you deploy your application, your code will not sit in a server, in a virtual computer somewhere. It will just be called whenever there is a request for it. So guys, I think that's it for my technical session, our technical session. So let me give back the floor to our hosts. I hope you've learned and gained something today. And thank you for participating and listening to this webinar. Thank you, guys.
Ayan. So,
That's it, no? Thank you, Mr. Casero. So guys, if you have any questions or clarifications to our speaker regarding sa topic, you can input it on our chat box, or kanina may mga nag-send na, so we We're gonna read it na lang. So first, from Lloyd Joseph Hidalgo, if I am a beginner, what is the best to learn first? HTML, CSS, or JavaScript?
Okay, so if you're beginner, my advice is you don't learn everything at once. So for example, you start with HTML. So there are thousands of things in HTML. So my advice is that you learn just the bare minimum that you need, and then you move on to the next topic. You learn CSS, and then just what you need. For example, what we did earlier, those things are just the things that we need. Even though there are a lot more, that's just barely scratching the surface. And like that, you just learn the things that you need, and then you basically you keep learning every day until you master what you want. So my advice is that keep learning one thing at a time. Of course, you learn first those core web technologies such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's a point to start.
Okay, so we have another question from Jane Fuentes Pina. What is your preferred development environment?
Okay, so for web development, actually my preferred development environment is using Linux. But then there is a limitation that you can't access apps that are only supported in Windows, such as Photoshop and those things. So uh, thankfully, there is a feature in Windows now, which is WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux, which lets us use the Linux kernel inside our Windows desktop environment. So now whenever I want to develop web applications, I just boot into the subsystem for Linux without rebooting my computer. So it's basically two things in at the same time, two birds in one stone. So you can use Linux while still using Windows operating system.
So for our third question from John Ranilo Ortiz. So aside from JavaScript, are there other programming languages that can be used for web development?
Yes, there are a lot of languages. For example, like I mentioned earlier, for monolithic apps, you build apps in one place. So you don't necessarily need to write JavaScript to create websites. For example, in Laravel, the language is PHP. So PHP supports templating HTML. So even without writing JavaScript and just writing HTML and CSS, you can still write websites. So if you really need interactivity in the browsers, then you really need to write JavaScript. So that's why JavaScript, HTML, and CSS are the core web technologies, because in the end, these are the three languages that your websites will compile to when when they arrive in the browser. But you can use other languages in development.
Okay, so last question from Lloyd Jason Kaong. As a beginner in web development, what are the opportunities that we will face in the current industry?
So for in my experience, there are still a lot of job opportunities for web development, but because there are a lot of job opportunities and because information is now easily accessible, that also means that you have a lot of competitors in for your opportunities in the industry. So my advice is that you just focus in one thing that you are good at. For example, if you just want front end, then you focus on the front end. You focus on the core or on the deeper aspects of front end, such as user interfaces, user experiences, because in the end, if you want to target big companies, they won't assign all the tasks in web development to just a single person. They will split the tasks into multiple persons in the organization. For example, there is a person that is tasked just to develop APIs, a person that is tasked just to test those things, and then there's a person that is tasked just to even design the site and not necessarily in coding, just design it in Photoshop or Figma. And then there's another to develop that website in HTML and CSS. So if you want to really fit in the industry, you can try to focus in just one thing. But if you really want to develop your own applications, for example, if you're a solo developer and you don't necessarily want to enter into companies, then You learn one at a time, and then eventually you'll be a full stack developer. You're both the back end, you're both the front end, you're also the one designing. And I guess there's a kind of satisfaction in that as well.
Okay, so thank you so much.
That's it, no, for our Q&A portion. Sana na-address ng speaker natin ang mga question niyo about web development. So at this point, Mr. Casaro will show the answer on the given activity. And also remind lang, no, sa code sa GitHub na naka-post na or nasa chat box.
Yes, you can access the repository. Click nyo lang yung link para ma-open nyo yun. Okay, so yung para sa activity.
Okay, let me share my screen. 7 to know? 7? Level 7?
Yes.
Okay, so our frogs are at the top, our lily pads are at the bottom. So we can position these frogs. We need to position them so that they are spaced, there's space in between them. So let's try justify content. Let's try space between. I think this is not that accurate. Let's try space around. Oh, I think this is the one, space around. So justify content, space around. And now you notice that they're at the top while these lily pads are at the end. So let's try align items. Okay, so can be flex end as well, or end. So this is the correct answer. So congratulations to the winners.
Ayan, so Jen.
So to give the token of gratitude to our technical speaker, we would like to award this certificate. May we request Mr. Casera to be back on the spotlight. So there we go, and allow us to read the content.
Yes. Mindanao State University, General Santos City, College of Engineering, Electrical and Electronics Engineering Department, Certificate of Recognition is hereby awarded to Mark John Larry A. Casero for dedicating his time and effort as a technical speaker during the conduct of the webinar entitled Web Development Tooling Front to Back, held virtually via Zoom, given this 16th day of March 2022 at General Santos City, Philippines. Signed by Dr. Cristina P. Dadula, Chairman of the Electrical and Electronics Engineering Department, and Dr. Noel S. Gunay, Dean of the College of Engineering. So, photo op, please. Okay, I guess that's it.
Thank you, guys.
So, thank you so much.
So, and now, at this moment, we will finally announce the winners sa activity natin kanina. So, guys, may 4 po tayong winners na naunang nakapag-submit ng tama answer, and each of them will receive 50 pesos GCash. So, and the winners are Wenhel Ikudan, Pauline Joy Acevedo, Lloyd Joseph Hidalgo,
Rainier Tolentine.
and Rainier Tolentine.
Okay. So
wait
congratulations, guys. You
Wait
can
lang po
wait
kayo
for the
sa message
DM.
ng organizers for the instructions on how to claim your prize.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Mr. Mark John Larry Casero, for the invaluable effort and time you have allotted for this technical seminar.
Indeed, our attendees learned so much from your discussions earlier, and I hope that everyone had fun participating in today's seminar.
So guys, how did you find the activity? Comment your answers in our chat lobby. So, okay, thank you. I learned a lot.
Okay. May na-learn din pala yung organizers natin from our technical speaker. Kasi of course, we don't know the content of Mr. Casero's discussion. So, yun. So, thank you so much. We also have a sign out attendance form. Take note lang guys. So just click the link provided in the chat box and fill it in. And take note of the code flash on the screen, maybe here, as it is important in submitting the attendance form.
So at this moment, let us now listen to the Electrical and Electronics Engineering Department Chairperson of the College of Engineering, Dr. Christina P. Dadula, for her closing remarks.
Hello, guys. Good morning, good noon.
Good noon,
Hello?
ma'am.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes po.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Congratulations to the team or group who successfully hosted or organized this webinar, Web Development Tooling Front to Back. This webinar is part of the requirements of the class ECE 196.1, Seminars, Colloquiums. This course or subject is a great opportunity for the students to practice or deliver technical topics in a form of seminar, webinar, colloquiums in an academic or scientific community. This is the first webinar conducted by the class. As your advisor, mentor in this class, I am really happy and proud with your performance. I appreciate your efforts before and during the conduct of the webinar. Thank you for the active participation of each of the members of the group, namely Casero 𝐷 Larry Casero, the technical speaker, other members of the group with no particular order, John Mark Lasutan, Genevieve Pongkol, Esther Grace Falate, Gwyneth Leonor, Reina Jane Raot, Princess Claire Punay, Jean Marie Geral, Justine Cerrado, and Rainier Mozo. Personally, I would like also to express my gratitude to Mr. Mark John Larry Casero for sharing his knowledge and expertise in web design and development. As mentioned in the introduction, Mark John Larry Casero, our technical speaker, was a gold medalist in 2019 VisMin Zonal WorldSkills Philippines competition. Mark John Larry was supposed to represent the Philippine team together with the gold medalist from the Luzon Zonal Skills competition in the ASEAN Skills competition, which was supposed to be held in Singapore. The ASEAN Skills competition was canceled due to the COVID-19 outbreak. To all the participants, thank you for your active participation. The basics of web design and development were delivered in 2 hours, brief but comprehensive. We hope that you've learned something from this webinar, enough for you to start or explore web design and development. We are loaded with so many concepts this morning related to web design basics, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Git, GitHub, and other topics indicated in the last few slides of our technical speaker. I guess it would be friendlier for those with no or little background of web design if we have at least 2 webinars for this topic, maybe one for the front end and one for the back end, maybe. Well, if there is a demand and we have another round of webinars in our class, and if time permits and our technical speaker is willing, maybe we can have another session related to web design. Okay, so expect more technical topics from our class. Our goal is 1 webinar every 2 weeks. So we hope to see you in our future webinars. Okay, we now end our webinar. Again, everyone, thank you. Back to you. Thank you.
And so thank you so much, Dr. Christina Dadula. Indeed, this is a great opportunity for our students, for my fellow students who are knowledgeable enough in technical in technical discussion. So ma-share nila yung kanilang insights, yung kanilang learnings, yung kanilang knowledge sa ibang students din within the institution or maybe even outside the institution. As of now, we have students also from outside of MSU. So before we end, we advise everyone to turn on their cameras for documentation purposes. So please turn on your cameras, guys. And also refer to the code. You can see it on the screen. Reina.
Ina. 1, 2. 1, 2. Ina.
Okay. So thank you so much. And there we have it. Web development tooling front to back ends here. But we hope that everyone will be more curious and continue learning web development. Who knows, you might be the next big thing in this part of ICT.
So, and to our technical speaker, Mr. Casero, thank you for lending us your time, skills, and knowledge. And to the participants, thank you for making time today, and we hope that you learned a lot about web development.
This has been Princess Claire Punay
and Genevieve Pongkol.
Good day once again.